All right, well, let's get underway. I guess a few more people are still coming in, but we've got a lot to get through, so I think it's worthwhile starting. First of all, welcome everyone to this public information session webinar on the Ocean Decade Vision 2030 process. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alison Clausen. I'm the Deputy Coordinator of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and I'm here with several of my colleagues who will also be presenting throughout the webinar. We're really delighted to be having this session with you today. We did one earlier this morning as well. This is for a later time zone as well, and it's a really important session because it really is one of the first moments where we've been able to talk to a broader group of stakeholders about the Vision 2030 process, about its importance, and particularly the ways in which you can get involved. So just a quick housekeeping thing before we go to the agenda. Please note this webinar is being recorded. We're just doing that because despite having the two sessions and having a very large number of participants, we know there were others who could not join, and so we'll be putting the recordings onto the website. But if we could move to the next slide, just to give you an overview of what we're going to discuss today. We are going to, well, first we'll have the welcome, which we've just done. I'll then just give you a quick overview of the objectives of the webinar and why we're aiming to do this and how it fits into the Vision 2030 process more rapidly. I'll give you a rapid presentation of the Ocean Decade Action Framework, again, to give you more of the context of really where this whole idea and the rationale for the Vision 2030 process came from, and then talk about the links between the process and the upcoming Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona in April next year, which is a key moment for the decade, but also for the Vision 2030 process and some of the results that will be presented there. I'll then hand over to my colleague, Nicola Bassan, the Science Officer at the Decade Coordination Unit here at IOC UNESCO, who will dive more into the details about the actual process itself, how it's structured, how we're coordinating it, who's involved, some of the key dates and so on. And then we're actually going to hear from many of the co-chairs of the 10 working groups that we have set up for the Vision 2030 process, who are going to give you an overview of the work that's been done so far, some of the initial findings that are coming through the process, some of the challenges they're facing, and some of the next steps that they will be undertaking as they prepare the series of white papers that you'll hear about that are really forming the backbone of the Vision 2030 process. We then hope to have time for some Q&A. I must say in the session this morning, there was so much rich discussion in the presentations from the co-chairs. We didn't get much time from Q&A, but just to let you know, there is of course the Q&A box in Zoom. So if you've got questions as we're going through, please put the questions progressively into that Q&A box, and we and the co-chairs will be able to answer them as we go through. And then we'll finish off in about 90 minutes or so with some quick takeaways and future information on future steps to engage in the Vision 2030 process moving forward, because as the name suggests, it is very much a process that is going to run over the next few years within the Ocean Decade. So with that, let's move on to the next slide, which is really talking about the main objectives of this webinar. First of all, as I mentioned, this is really the Vision 2030 process itself really started, I guess, as a concept towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year, with this growing desire on the part of the Ocean Decade community, as well as increased recommendations and advice from the Decade Advisory Board, to really start defining a more collective and common vision for the way forward in the decade. So really looking at Ocean Decade challenges, looking at what the strategic ambition for those Ocean Decade challenges was, and really starting to think about how we could be trying to define some common goals and some indicators and milestones to sort of track and measure progress towards those goals. So this is obviously a very ambitious process, and it's one that is going to need an enormous amount of stakeholder engagement. As you'll hear from Nicola, we have set up a structure to lead this process, but the process is only going to be a success if there is broad stakeholder engagement. And so really this webinar is the first public outing in some ways of the Vision 2030 process, and that is its key objective, to really provide information on the process and let you know the results so far and how you can be engaged moving forward. We will present some initial outputs of the different white papers that are being produced through those process. We hope to be able to collect some of your initial inputs and feedback, and then really importantly set out the process for further detailed engagement as we're moving forward, because as I said, this is a process that will continue and will continue to need that broad stakeholder engagement. A couple of, I guess, higher level things that I'd like to say about the Vision 2030 process itself, and some of this actually came out of some of the discussion in this morning's webinar, that the Vision 2030 process is not aiming to revisit the Ocean Decade and revisit the priorities that were set. It's really aiming to take the very strong portfolio of decade programs, of decade projects that are already working and have been working over the last 3 years, and build on that to identify where there still may be gaps, where there are still needs, and where there are still priorities that the Ocean Decade can fill. So it's really building on that very strong foundation that already exists. And it's also a way of helping really to target the niche of the Ocean Decade moving forward, so that we're really optimizing where we're putting our efforts, and we're also optimizing discussions, for example, that we may be having with funders in terms of where some of the priority needs are for support to ocean science throughout the rest of the decade. So it is very much a process that is integrated with the overall strategic approach and vision for the decade, and really trying to help us refine and evolve the way we're thinking about the Ocean Decade challenges and the overall goals and priorities of the Ocean Decade. So if we can move to the next slide, please. This graphic, I think many of you will have seen before. It's really the action framework for the decade, which sets out that broad theory of change on moving from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. And of course, the decade actions, the programs, the projects, activities, and contributions really being central to that, because they're the motor of where the decade is generating ocean knowledge, where it's using ocean knowledge, where it's identifying new needs for ocean knowledge for sustainable development. Now, of course, all these decade actions, and we now have 47 programs to over 280 projects. In the recent work that we did through the monitoring and evaluation, we've calculated we have over 4,000 research institutes involved in decade actions, something like 70,000 individuals who have a direct or indirect involvement in decade actions. So there is a massive momentum and engagement and foundation. And this process is really trying to help take what has been a very bottom-up and organic movement through the Ocean Decade and help to define this collective structure and collective way forward around the 10 Ocean Decade challenges. And you can see those 10 Ocean Decade challenges listed there. And one of the reasons for this is that within the decade already, we have a pretty good way of tracking and measuring progress and seeing how things are advancing with the decade actions themselves. We also have other initiatives underway within IOC UNESCO, and particularly the State of the Ocean report, which was piloted last year and is starting up preparation again, which is focusing more on the higher level decade outcomes, the more aspirational goals of the decade outcomes. But what is missing in the decade is really this collective vision of what are the very quantifiable milestones and ambition for each of these Ocean Decade challenges, and how can we track progress towards those. And that is exactly the question that the Vision 2030 process is really trying to answer by focusing on the Ocean Decade challenges. So if we can move to the next slide. And all of this, of course, is really being done as an integral part of the lead up to the 2024 UN Ocean Decade Conference. So from the outset, the decade had always envisaged a series of international convenings, international gatherings of the Ocean Decade community and other partners that would happen every 3 years. The first of those, of course, was the kickoff, which was an online meeting because of the COVID pandemic in 2021. So the 2024 UN Ocean Decade Conference is really a critical moment, because it will be the first in-person gathering for the Ocean Decade community to, first of all, to celebrate everything that has been achieved over the last 3 years, to take stock of achievements, but also to look towards the future. And the Vision 2030 process will give the foundation to look towards the future, the way it is being developed with the working groups and the white papers, will really give a lot of substance to the 2024 UN Ocean Decade Conference. The conference is being held in Barcelona. It is being very generously hosted by the government of Spain, and we're working very closely with a number of Spanish institutions to pull together, in fact, what is going to be a whole week of programming from the 8th to the 12th of April, with the conference really being the culmination of that week over a 3-day period at the Convention Centre in Barcelona. And if we can move to the next slide, please. And in this 3-day gathering from the 10th to 12th of April as part of the conference, you'll see that there are these 4 sessions that are with the coloured titles here, where we are going to be looking, the challenges have been grouped, and we're really going to be using through a series of plenary and parallel sessions, looking at how we can really dive into the outputs of the Vision 2030 process, how we can get thought leaders into the room to be talking about some of the findings of what we're seeing from the Vision 2030 process, how we can be workshopping the white papers in quite a granular way coming out of the Vision 2030 process, having the co-chairs there, members of the working groups there, and really triggering and catalyzing a discussion so that by the end of this week, we walk away with this collective understanding and agreement of what some of the priorities for the decade challenges are going to be. So the conference is a really very important moment for the decade generally, as I say, for the Vision 2030 process. Evidently, we hope to see many of you there. Many of you, I hope, have already pre-registered for the conference. The actual conference registration will open in December. The call for posters and the call for oral presentation is currently open, just opened yesterday. So do have a look at that as well. We're also, in addition to the main conference, going to be having a very large number of satellite events, both before the conference and during the conference itself. And many of those will also pick up on the themes that are coming through the Vision 2030 process and using some of those events to really get some either discussion before the conference or during the conference itself on some of the more specific issues coming through the Vision 2030 process. So if you haven't already, do have a look at the website for the conference or at the Ocean Decade website, and that will also give you more information on this progress and this process through the Vision 2030 process over the next few months into the Barcelona conference and beyond. And with that, I will finish there, and I will hand over to Niccolo Bassan now, who is going to talk a little bit more about the sort of more the operational elements of the Vision 2030 process, and then will lead us into some presentations from the different working groups on the actual substance of what they've been working on through this process over the last few months. So over to you, Niccolo.
Thank you very much, Alison, and good morning, good evening to everyone. As Alison was mentioning, I'll briefly bring you through the overall process of the Vision 2030 process, and so on the strategic ambition setting within each working group and each white paper that will be discussed in Barcelona. As you can see, the strategic ambition is composed of different elements, but this demand comes from the decade community itself to shape this common vision for the next 8 years and enhance also a collective impact towards the common goals. This is, of course, a unique window of opportunity to design together the science we need and avoid dispersion of decade actions and actually boost any possible synergies among them. So there's a growing need also to measure and document impact of the ocean decade, and the Vision 2030 process is actually looking forward to this. As you can see, the strategic ambition is made up of different elements, starting from priority datasets to unlock and generate, but also technology and innovation solutions, infrastructures for data and knowledge generations, knowledge to generate and share, but also partnership and resources, capacity development and exchange needs, and of course, indicators to measure progress. The overall ambition of the Vision 2030 process and white papers and the working groups would be to answer the question, what does success look like for this Ocean Decade Challenge at the end of the decade? And also, what milestones and targets do we need to achieve throughout the decade to be on the path for success for these challenges. Of course, one of the aims, it's also to align resource mobilization priorities to existing programs and to the existing gaps actually in terms of needs. As a reminder, please feel free to use the Q&A box to ask any questions during these presentations, so that we can start answering any burning questions along the way. To give you just a quick an overview of the numbers within the Vision 2030 process, of course, we have 10 working groups for the 10 challenges, so one working group per challenge. These working groups are chaired by 2 co-chairs, so we have a total of 20 co-chairs. Within the different composition of the working groups, we have more or less 150 experts coming from more than 50 countries and involving 21 early career ocean professionals, and more or less 40 actions, 40 UN Ocean Decade actions. Among these, we have 26 supporting staff, which are following the work of the different working groups. As Alison was mentioning, one of the main outcomes of this process, of this first phase of the process, will be these white papers that will be presented in Barcelona and commonly discussed, to then arrive at an operational and implementational phase. As you can see on the left side, there's the white paper layout. The white papers will be very brief, between 7 to 10 page, to be right to the point and then summarize the key needs and aspects of that specific challenge. And so we have an executive summary, an introduction, the strategic ambition setting, which is the core of the white paper and of the Vision 2030 process itself, and the milestones and indicators to track progress towards the achievement of the challenge. After the working group have drafted the white papers, they will undergo a public review process starting in January and ending at the end of February, more or less. And of course, please feel free to reach out if you would like to be included in the list of reviewers for any specific white paper. These white papers, together with a synthesis report, will be presented and discussed at the Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona in April 2024. And together with the Ocean Decade community, these white papers will be consolidated, and an operational plan will be developed to implement and operationalize the strategic ambitions for each of the challenges. How you can engage, of course, through in different ways. First of all, you can get involved through targeted consultations with specific working groups. You can participate in the open review process of the white papers, as just mentioned. You can join the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference if you've registered, if you're planning to register, and if you submitted any satellite event. But of course, you can also share the Vision 2030 process during events and collect any feedback among your professional and personal networks. And you can contact the coordination team, and we'll share our contacts very soon on the chat for you to reach out. But without further ado, I would like to start with the presentations from the working groups. They will have 4 minutes each, and we'll start backwards this time. So we'll start with working group 10, and it's of course focusing on challenge 10, which is change humanity's relationship with the ocean. And the 2 co-chairs are Diz Glitero, national lead, Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, and Nicola Bridge, head of the Ocean Advocacy and Engagement of the Ocean Conservation Trust. I think Diz is here today, this session. So Diz, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Nicolo. Great to be here. And hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening. And Nicolo, at the 3.5-minute mark, you just raise your hand, and that'll make sure my fellow colleagues get the equal time and a lot of opportunity for question and answers. As Nicolo mentioned, I've got the privilege of co-chairing Working Group 10 with Nicola Bridge from the Ocean Conservation Trust, and a fantastic working group of 18 individuals from around the world. We've been meeting regularly since June, when the group was established. Challenge 10 is a unique one. It's the foundational challenge. All other, challenge 1 to 9 intersect with challenge 10. The other challenges are much more, natural, physical science focused, data and infrastructure focused. Challenge 10 is about people. It's the broader society. It's how do we action the science in meaningful ways on the ground in communities that are locally relevant, culturally appropriate. How do we raise awareness and understanding? How do we build those social, emotional, physical connections between people and the ocean? And strengthening the way individuals value the ocean. It's also ultimately about behavior change. And what are those barriers and motivators and enablers to help drive change? I don't know, Nicolo, if there's the 2 slides available, but if we could move to the next slide, that'd be great. So a lot of the discussion in the first couple of months with the working group, as well as additional experts and some leaders within the ocean literacy community, for example, a strategic ocean communications group, have all been leaning in these initial few months to get started. And a lot of the discussion was actually looking at kind of where we started, and even the framing of Challenge 10, changing humanity's relationship with the ocean. It was acknowledged right out of the gates that for not everyone does that relationship have to change. If we, the Indigenous working group members in the group, for time immemorial, that relationship has been strong and healthy with the ocean. So in many ways, it's about restoring our relationship with the ocean, or some people's relationship with the ocean. And so we've been working towards a strategic ambition, which in its current draft right now is to create enabling conditions and environments to support humanity to have the motivation and capability and opportunity to behave in ways that ensure a healthy ocean. And so that's kind of that broad overarching ambition statement that we're working from as we start to, draft out the white paper. We'll move to the next slide, please, Nicolo. And the bulk of the discussion is about what will enable that overarching strategic ambition for Challenge 10 to happen. Like, what are those drivers, and who are the users or movers or enablers that will allow that to happen? So currently, in this very iterative and fluid process, there's 4 main drivers that Working Group 10 have focused in on. And so just acknowledging knowledge systems, within this decade and the focus on science, it's much more than the natural physical. And in particular to Challenge 10, it's a lot about the marine social sciences. It's a lot about education and learning strategies and transformative pedagogy that allow people to really build those emotional connections. It's also about social marketing and environmental psychology and behavioral science. It's these other types of science and ways of knowing, and Indigenous ways of knowing in particular, that will really help inform relationship with the ocean. And how do we transform relationships with the ocean? Education's obviously another huge driver, not just formal education, but informal. How do we, create experiences and opportunities that build connection, social, emotional, physical connections? Because without that, we often don't act. We don't act on what we know, we act on what we feel. So we've got to build those connections. Communication is key. How do we frame messages that really motivate people, inspire people, bring them in, mobilize them? And then cultural connections, essential to just figure out, there's no one way. So what are those different cultural and socio kind of ecological relationships and ways that people understand and connect and act that are really important for us to build on. In terms of where we're at right now as a working group, just lastly, where each of the working group members are reaching out into their networks and different communities, and are kind of workshopping some of these key higher level elements of the white paper. Is this the right strategic ambition? Does it resonate? Are these the right drivers? What's missing? And there's a feedback form that we're collecting input kind of far and wide over the next 4 or 5 weeks. So if Challenge 10 is of real interest to you and you'd like to be a part of that input form, we'll follow up in the follow-up that comes out from the DCU for this webinar. So Nicolo, the update from Challenge 10. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Diz, and thank you for showing us the updates of Working Group 10. In the interest of time, we'll move to Working Group 9, focusing on Challenge 9, so skills, knowledge, and technology for all. And the 2 co-chairs are Brian Arbic, Professor of Oceanography at the University of Michigan, and Edem Mahu, Senior Lecturer of Marine Biogeochemistry at the University of Ghana. I think Edem is connected at this time, so Edem, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolo. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. wherever you are. I'm pleased to be co-chairing this working group with Professor Brian Arbic on skills, knowledge, and technology for all. This said that working group 10 was very unique, but I think that this working group 9 is also very, very unique because this is the working group that is looking at the skills, the technology tools that we need to keep the decade objectives on track and to make sure that the knowledge that we are generating across all the other working groups are openly available and accessible by all. So this is also a unique challenge. The goal of this challenge is to ensure comprehensive capacity development and equitable access to data, information, knowledge, and technology across all aspects of ocean science and for all our stakeholders, some of whom are present today. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a brief update of what our working group has been up to. So we formed our working group a couple of months ago, about 20 members, which is quite big in terms of diversity, in terms of the gender. We consider gender, geography, and also career stage, but also more importantly, expertise and skills related to the challenge that we are trying to address. And we have had a couple of meetings, several meetings online with our working group members, and in some instances, the co-chairs have also met to discuss issues. Some of the things that we have key achievements are the long lists of key inequities. So one of the things that we did comprehensively was to look at what the key inequities in capacity development are in terms of the users and also the user needs. And we created a general outline so far of the white paper, and we are in the process of the writing stage. So we started writing, we've made some key assignments. But that's just on the progress. So the current status, what are some of the inequities that we have identified? And we are still consulting and trying to make sure that this is as comprehensive as possible. We have found out that there is technological and digital divide, infrastructure and monitoring disparities among the ocean science community. Data access and ownership is a challenge. Data quality and standardization, knowledge generation and use, gender and diversity representation in ocean sciences is another key inequity that we have identified. And then in terms of education, we have identified some disparities, language and communication barriers. We have also identified funding and resource allocation problems, and as well as the political and also policy barriers and resource exploitation. So these are the key inequities that we have identified, because we need to know what the problems are before we set that strategic ambition. Next slide, please. So then the question is, how do we address these key inequities? So how are we going to make sure that at the end of the decade, we make capacity development a universal thing? Everybody benefits from capacity development, and we make sure that everybody, no matter where you are, you have the necessary skills, technology that it takes to be able to address the challenges that we're looking at. So some of the things that we're looking at are equitable knowledge and data sharing, thoughtful policy developments at various levels, co-designing of projects through interdisciplinary teams, We are looking at ability to be able to integrate public and private sector resources, mobilize resources from both public and private sector, assisting early career ocean professionals, enhancing local capacity and focusing on communities that are in need. I mean, one thing that we know now is that there is that inequity between the global north and the global south. So we need to focus on those communities that really are in need, and international collaboration is very key in trying to address these inequities. Then we also identified some user needs. So we are looking at needs such as funding, sustainable employment in ocean sciences, sense of community, fit for purpose equipment, representation in terms of the place or positions of different groups, especially underrepresented groups in decision-making bodies, access to data, journal articles and international meetings, training and education, inclusive collaboration, access to technology, research vessels and key infrastructure, local knowledge integration into the science that we are doing, and then acknowledgement and respect policy and governance, and elimination of inherent biases and stereotyping in ocean sciences. So these are just among some of the user needs that we have identified. And so on that note, thank you very much, Nicolo. And if there are any questions to answer.
Thank you very much, Adam, for showing us the topic and the progress of Working Group 9. We'll move to Working Group 8 on Challenge 8, create a digital representation of the ocean. Two co-chairs are Jan Bart Callewaert, lead manager of the Decade Coordination Office for Ocean Data Sharing at IOC UNESCO, and Paula Cristina Sierra Correa, coordinator of the Marine and Coastal Research Institute, José Benito Vives de Andrés. I think Jan Bart is connected, so I'll give the floor to you, Jan Bart. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicolo, and also from my side, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. It's a great pleasure to speak on behalf of the co-chairs, my fellow co-chair, Paula Sierra from Invemar in Colombia, and myself, but also all of the members of the working group. To share with you some updates on the progress and opportunities to contribute to the ambition setting for Challenge 8, which is dealing with the creation of a digital representation of the ocean. And on your screen, you can see how this challenge has been defined in the implementation plan. I'm not going to read it for you. I will let you read it yourself, but I would like to clarify that very early on with our working group, we looked at this definition and realized that the term digital representation can, in fact, have many different interpretations. And we wanted to clarify that from the working group perspective, in the context of the white paper, the digital representation is not limited or does not mean a digital replica or digital twin ocean per se, but rather the broader collection of digital data and information about the past, current, and future state of the ocean, including socioeconomic data and information, which allows us to generate a better understanding or draw up a picture of the ocean and the various dynamics at different scales. So in this context, the digital representation refers both to the ultimate end products, such as maps, forecasts, time series, model outputs, or even digital twin or other applications. But most importantly, it refers to the underlying backbone digital resources, the system and processes that underpin and facilitate the creation of these end products. And I think that's important to set the context. If I can have the first or the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So, as many of the other working groups, we have a very strong composition with a very diverse representation, both in terms of expertise, gender, and geography. We also are blessed with having a number of observers from IOC and from the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange Project Office. and its component programs such as OBIS and the Ocean Data and Information System. And we started in June, had a number of brainstorming meetings initially to clarify the concept and the work plan, and a number of more smaller group drafting sessions, which culminated in a white paper background document, a narrative, which is going to be used as the basis for the white paper, where we looked at questions such as, what do we mean by digital representation of the ocean? What is the time frame for a strategic ambition setting? Who are our users? What do they need? What content do we need to provide? By when? What tools or services should be in place by 2030? What is realistic? What are the minimum viable products and services that we need to deliver? And what do we want to deliver on the long term? We also realized quite early on that we needed to engage with the other challenge working groups, as they are in a way also our users that we are going to serve. So how can you participate or contribute? As Nicola already mentioned, we have the Ocean Decade webinars. There's the opportunities during the Barcelona conference, but leading up to that period, there are a number of events and conferences, and I take one specific example, the Digital Twins of the Ocean conference, which will take place from next week in China, and can also be followed online largely, where you can learn about the digital twins and how the backbone services can contribute to developing these services. But you can also get in touch with the co-chairs, myself and Paula Sierra, and the Decade Coordination Office for Ocean Data Sharing. So please do get in touch. We are here to help and serve you. Next slide, please. So where are we with in the process towards the strategic ambition setting for Challenge 8? If we look at who our users are, the working group established quite early on that, in fact, because of the cross-cutting nature of Challenge 8, we are here to serve everyone operating in the decade, working towards resolving the different thematic challenges in particular. That also means that our users are quite diverse in the level of expertise they have, and we need to make sure that we leave no one behind. So the other 9 challenges could in a way be considered as proxy users, which will help us define the data and information needs, both in terms of content and services. So what do our users need? Well, all of these users need 2 things: easy access to multidisciplinary ocean data and information on the one hand, and a series of tools and services that allows them to easily access and share data, information, and knowledge, but in ways that is tailored or adapted to their needs and capacities. And that's very important because that's very different depending on the users. So we looked at it from 2 angles. On the one hand, what kind of digital content do we need to make available? And on the other hand, what are the digital services that are needed? In terms of the digital content, we addressed it from both the side of the data product, so the end products in a way that we would like to make available. And for that, we rely very much on the decade programs and actions that are working on resolving the different thematic challenges, and the other working groups to help to identify particular global data layers that are iconic, that are flagship data products that we want to make available to the community, but it also act as drivers to pull in the data that is needed to develop those products. So that helps us to address data gaps, agree on standards, and improve the interoperability that will be largely based on existing communities working on these challenges and working on developing end products that are societally relevant and co-developed in a transparent process. At the same time, we identified that in addition to these global layers, we must also complement this with some very concrete and specific local case studies, but preferably from the global south, where communities are working to unlock data and developing data products at a high resolution to complement these flagship iconic data products at the global level. So then moving to the digital services, we identified 5 particular services that we feel are needed by the community. The first is a global ocean data discovery and access service, which would allow the scientific community to easily find, retrieve, visualize data and information that exists already. The second is to develop an online user-friendly digital atlas of the seas that allows everyone, even if you are not very data literate, or even the public at large, to access these iconic data products and global data layers, as well as information from these local case studies. Then we also put forward the need for a series of marine knowledge exchange mechanisms to share best practices, papers, reports, or other solutions that could be applications or decision support systems, or even digital twin applications. Fourthly, we identified the need to provide a sort of virtual help desk service, because we feel that there is still a lot of need by the community to have guidance on where they can find certain digital resources, but also on how they can contribute, how they should manage their data, and how they can make it fair, findable, interoperable, accessible, and reusable. Fifth, there is a very high need to improve the data literacy in the community. And for that, we need to develop capacity and train the different communities. And we have Challenge 8 working group working on this matter, but also a capacity development facility and an Ocean Teacher Global Academy that we will be working on for this component. So to conclude, what are the next steps? We are trying to define what are these iconic data products from the different challenges that we want to make available by 2030. We are elaborating the services ideas and looking at synergies with the other working groups. That's going to be very important in the coming phase. And also looking forward to incorporate feedback from the community, including yourself. So very happy to take your comments and inputs as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Bart, for showing us the progress of Working Group 8. We'll move to Working Group 7. On Challenge 7, expand the Global Ocean Observing System, with the 2 co-chairs, Patricia Miloslavic, Program Lead of the East Antarctic Monitoring Program of the Australia Antarctic Division, and Joe Callaghan, Director of Oceanly Science. The 2 co-chairs unfortunately could not participate in this session since it's in the middle of the night for them right now. So I'll briefly introduce the challenge and the work they've done. Of course, Challenge 7 aims at ensuring a sustainable ocean observing system across all ocean basins that delivers accessible, timely, and actionable data and information to all users. And the main aim of Working Group 7 and of Challenge 7, of course, is to have a sustained scientific observation over time, which are, of course, essential and critical for different needs, including climate forecasting, operational services, and in general to monitor ocean health. The observation systems, of course, at a global scale are made up of both in situ and remote sensing facilities, and these needs to be integrated appropriately and have and be operationalized to be useful at hand. The working group will build on the Ocean Ops 19 papers and will rely also on the Decade Collaborative Center on Ocean Observing. It was last working group to be established, so it has been recently established. And the members of the working group are the following, as you can see. The expertise involved in the group is pretty multidisciplinary, going from marine chemistry to marine ecology, but also physical oceanography, biogeochemistry, and so on and so forth. The working group had a meeting, the first meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they're planning a meeting actually tonight. So that will be the second more operational meeting of the working group. And the activities right now, of course, are a little bit behind compared to other working groups, but they established the working group members, balancing expertise and geographical areas. They had this first meeting, and they discussed mostly the background of the UN decade challenges and the working group process, but also how to facilitate synergies and collaboration with other working groups, understand the priorities for the expansion of the ocean observations and its sustainability, and the use of automated and low-cost options, but also in the adoption of an integrative approach in co-designing, resourcing, and foundation of the Ocean Ops 19 papers. It's based also on the GOOSE, the Global Ocean Observing Strategy, and the planning of the Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Observing. Some first recommendation that came from the group, it would be the high-level drafting to fit in the established format space provided by the DCU. So a broad brainstorming on the first inputs for the white paper. But also the group started reflecting on priorities, starting from the societal part, and used the GOOSE delivery areas as the foundation for high-level priorities. The group focused not only on expanding the observing system, but also on securing and strengthening the current system, so making it sustainable over time, and in articulating the importance of having best practices and standard operating procedures for all essential ocean variables that are fit for purpose, as well as low-cost options associated to these standard operating procedures. They also worked on the approach of a new funding model that will be required. So expanding from the traditional funding sources and trying to involve a representative of one of these financial sectors within the working groups. And then they plan to reach out to other working groups to learn their specific needs for observational data. And that is also what the DCU is trying to facilitate among the different working groups. The next call I was mentioning will be tonight, and they'll focus also on assigning writing teams for the different sectors, sections of the white paper. So without further ado, I would like to jump to working group 6, so challenge 6, increase community resilience to ocean hazards. And the two co-chairs are Nadia Pinardi, professor of oceanography at the University of Bologna, and Srinivasa Kumar, director of the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. I know Nadia is connected, so I'll leave the floor to you, Nadia. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola, and good evening, everybody. So we have working group 6 on increased community resilience to ocean hazards, which is a working group very challenging because we have a long history behind, and tsunami early warning systems have been a big achievement for UNESCO IOC in the past years, but now connecting it to operational oceanography and to other hazards is the key. So we want to have multi-hazards early warning services for most of what we have listed as the geophysical, ecological, biological, weather, climate, and anthropogenic related ocean and coastal hazards. So the first activity of our group was to map the hazards and divide them into their categories, which are geophysical, geological, so going from tsunamis to subsidence and coastal erosion to landslides, and to ocean weather, sea level rise, ecological, wetland degradation, or algal blooms, and urbanization, wastewater systems. So our at the end of this decade, we would like to put the outcome in front of us, which would be a safer ocean where life and livelihoods are protected from ocean-related hazards. Then we started with. This is what we aim at. And we think that two pieces that will compose the safer ocean life and livelihoods will be to have people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems and have adaptation planning strategies to increase coastal resilience with science-based information in a most accessible and more adapted and best fit for purpose than we have up to now. So the first one, the people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems, are characterized by strong stakeholder engagement, a sharing of responsibilities, accessible communication, and institutional capacity building. So in addition to have the information available, have also built the understanding how to have a community awareness and even a response effective. And maybe indicators of such effectiveness, which is an important way to judge. And then the second part is use the new data from the Ocean Decade to prepare plans and solutions that should be composing the new marine spatial planning processes, which is another big program of UNESCO IOC and the UN Decade, which we'd like to have as an important reference framework for us. Next, please. So we went through a preliminary user need search and discovery. And here we divided our user needs into three categories that fit, in our opinion, the best our stakeholder investigation up to this point, which is the first, risk assessment. Second is risk reduction. And the other part is the governance and the social impact part. Okay, so for the risk assessment, we know we need, better observational evidence, if not, first of all, better bathymetry and dynamic bathymetry and this kind of information that is rarely accessible. And then we need, at the same time, new tools such as AI applied to hazards and impacts determination, and then adding, lots of new data on human activities that will allow us to look at vulnerabilities and then arrive at risk. Then risk reduction is the other important part where we will get the experience of, as I said, the tsunami community and extend it to multi-hazard. So use best suited early warning system, fit for purpose early warning systems for preparedness and response, etc. Among all this, I would say advanced data management capacity is a very important point. And then last but not least, contingency planning, how to do contingency planning and community partnerships to be able to govern, track, also have equitable information and risk reduction practices, and then enhance corporate social responsibility is another point. This is just a synthesis. We try to put a few, but this is the work we are doing. Now we have just almost finished the first collection by our working group of input data. We are a working group of 20 people, which across many disciplines, from economics to social to oceanography. And we will have a first draft of our white paper possibly by December, and for internal review. And we would love then to see with you eventually some more wider scrutiny of our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and for showing us the progress of Working Group 6. I would like to remind to everyone to post their questions in the Q&A box, and to the co-chairs to have a look to the Q&A box so that they could eventually start answering to some of the questions related to their working group. We'll move to Working Group 5 on Challenge 5, Unlock Ocean-Based Solutions to Climate Change, with the two co-chairs, Carol Robinson, Professor of Marine Sciences at the University of East Anglia, and Christopher Sabine, Professor of Oceanography at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I know Chris is connected, so I would like to leave the floor to you, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. It is a great honor to represent this working group along with my co-chair, Carol Robinson. Our question that we've been tasked with is unlocking ocean-based solutions to climate change. Climate change, of course, in many ways is the key question facing our global society right now, and something that many thousands, if not tens of thousands of scientists and researchers are working on at this very moment. So this represents quite a broad scope for us to cover. Next slide, please. Now, ocean-based solutions to climate change, of course, is a big question. Oops, sorry, if we can go back. The longer explanation of this particular challenge is to enhance understanding of the ocean climate nexus and generate knowledge and solutions to mitigate, adapt, and build resilience to the effects of climate change across all geographies and at all scales, and to improve services, including prediction for the ocean climate and weather. Whew, that is a lot to cover. And Nicolo and others, of course, have very generously given us all of 10 pages to try and cover this vast, incredible topic. So next slide. We've focused initially a lot of attention to try and think about how we would put together a working group, a writing team that could adequately address the appropriate scope and scale of this broad topic. And so we put together what we think is a very diverse writing team. We represent 13 countries with a gender balance and representing all career stages, as well as a range of affiliations and expertise. You can see in the middle of the table here, we have expertise in a number of different areas, and we've kind of grouped them. So we have 15 members. We've grouped them into 3 groups of 5. We have those that are representing the various decadal actions from the ocean decade that are connected to climate change and the role of the oceans in climate change and addressing climate change issues. We've got 5 people that represent a full range of areas that are subject experts. And then we wanted to make sure that we also covered potential users of the information that would be provided here. So you can see that we've got people representing risk and resilience, engineering, ecologists, conservation, restoration, lawyers, and policymakers. So we're trying to cover the full scope of users and stakeholders that we hope to address with this chapter. Next slide, please. Now, again, this is a very large scope. So we first met to think about what are the particular key issues that we wanted to address. And in trying to narrow this down to something we felt would be meaningful and useful, we touched on two key approaches to addressing climate change with the oceans. And that would be mitigation approaches as well as adaptation approaches. And we spent a bit of time thinking about these and thinking about the fact that there are some very significant differences between these two. They are sometimes kind of mentioned together or as if they are synonyms of each other, but they absolutely are not. Of course, adaptation are the actions that we would take to recognizing that climate change is happening. It's happening today, and we need to adapt to that changing environment in a way that makes our society more resilient, more able to withstand the changes that we're observing, as opposed to mitigation, which are proactive efforts that we would take to try and stop or modify climate change. And we wanted to recognize that there are different knowledges and information required for those different approaches. We also wanted to recognize that in many ways, what you hear in the news and from the general public is they are looking for the one bullet, the one thing that's going to fix climate change. And we want to make that point that there is no one solution, that what we need is a portfolio of approaches, that we need not just mitigation, not just carbon capture and storage, which seems to be the big thing that everyone's talking about now, but we need both mitigation and adaptation to occur simultaneously. And there will be a range of approaches to that, as we've kind of outlined some of the pieces to that on the left there. Now we've met twice. We've also wanted to focus on the user needs. You'll hear this theme, and you've heard it already in many of the other working groups, that a direction that we want to take with this is to think about what is it that users need. And we've outlined, of course, a very long list of those needs. And we wanted to make sure that we're not only addressing the needs of the policymakers and the general public, of course, which you're all aware of, but also thinking about, what are potentially needs for those that are trying to implement various mitigation or adaptation strategies. Those companies that are developing already to try and address carbon capture and storage in the ocean, that are trying to think about how we can develop green energy resources in the ocean. What are their needs? And so we've taken that long list of user needs, and we're trying to focus now on putting together the text and paring this down to a manageable length in our white paper. And we look forward to having a draft ready in January for public review and comment. And I'm quite sure that this chapter will get a lot of feedback. So we are looking forward to that, and connecting with all of these other working groups that, as you can see already, will provide key pieces for addressing the issues that we're tasked with trying to outline in our chapter. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for showing us Working Group 5 and the progress made to date. We'll move to Working Group 4, On Challenge 4, develop a sustainable and equitable ocean economy. The two co-chairs are Peter Hogan, Policy Director of the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, and Andrew Rhodes, Coordinator of the High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy. I believe Peter is connected, so I'll leave the floor to you, Peter. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Nicola. I'm here and happy to be here with all of you in this important event for the Ocean Decade Vision 2030 process. So the topic for this group is to develop a sustainable and equitable ocean economy. We may say from the start perhaps that sustainable should probably include equitable. It wouldn't be sustainable without being equitable, but we have spent a lot of time discussing equity in the group, and we think it's quite appropriate to sort of highlight that also, as has been done in the title for the challenge. So this is all about knowledge, innovation, and solutions for equitable and sustainable development of the ocean economy under changing environmental, social, and climate conditions. Now, ocean economy is really human activities relating to the ocean, so it's really a big and broad topic. So if I could have the next slide, please. What we think then is that in terms of the Decade of Ocean Science, what we will try to be talking about is guiding the development of an equitable and sustainable ocean economy. That's the role of the knowledge part of this triangle of action and policy development and knowledge. And I've included a figure up here, which is drawn from the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, which is the approach taken there, which we think is crucial, that effective protection, sustainable production, which the first thing one thinks about in terms of sustainable ocean economy, and also the third, equitable prosperity. These three aspects have to go together in the long run if we are to develop a sustainable ocean economy. They cannot compete. We cannot talk anymore about balance, saving some part of the ocean for one and another part for the other. We have to look at it together. So to the left, you see the first part of the table of contents. We have an active and diverse author group, like I think most of the other working groups. I don't go through that in detail. We have agreed on sort of the language we're using, the structure, written perhaps 50% of it, even if it's too long. And the whole approach is integral, holistic view of the sustainable use of ocean resources. And again, not only emphasizing the economic value of ocean resources. This is not about economy competing with some of the other aspects discussed in other working groups. So I think we can jump to the next slide. Key messages are being discussed. We think here that actually for this challenge in particular, but maybe even in the longer run for the decade of ocean science as such, it's important to challenge the traditional paradigm of how we work in science, that we have seeking knowledge, we explore opportunities, plan activities, in this case sustainable ocean activities, then they happen, they are financed. But this is really to be more closely linked in an ecosystem way to science, to policy and action. And then the societal goals, which is really the sustainable development agenda, is also relevant here on a smaller scale in different parts of the ocean, which enables action and finance activities. And then we create a positive feedback loop here of demand for science. We think that the growth in activities in the ocean that is projected by many competent groups towards 2050, energy, food, whatever, is going to lead for an increased demand for science if we do this right. And I think that's what will benefit everybody. So we are talking about here, when it comes to the vision, what are the types of things that we would like the vision of the ocean economy to include. And I would like to mention maybe four before I close, that a sustainable ocean economy should be supported by accessible and comprehensive knowledge. That's the number one. It should be managed in an equitable manner and with local and indigenous knowledge being integrated. It should be accessible and equitable for current and future generations. And it should be underpinned by sustainable practices across industry. So that's the ocean we want, and that's how we are presently thinking to address the pathway for the sustainable ocean economy. And input is welcome at any time on any means that you find convenient. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nicolo.
Thank you very much, Peter, for showing us progress on Working Group 4. We'll move then to Working Group 3 on Challenge 3, Sustainably Feed the Global Population. The two co-chairs are Vera Agostini, Deputy Director of the FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture Policy and Resources Division, and Eric Olsen, Head of Research of the Research Group for Sustainable Development at the Institute of Marine Research in Norway. The presentation will be done by Céline Tiffet. So please, Céline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolo. And yes, I'm privileged to be here representing Vera and Eric. I'm a consultant working for Working Group 3. So without further ado, can you pass the next slide, please? So as we know, today, billions of people depend on the ocean for nutrition and livelihood. And Working Group 3 aims to propose solutions for leveraging aquatic foods to meet this global food demand, while also taking into consideration sustainability and equity. And the importance of transforming the global food system as it is today is highlighted at the international level, and notably, I noted at the bottom of the screen, the several SDGs to which Working Group 3 contributes. Before diving in, I wanted to start by just giving a brief summary of what we mean by aquatic foods for those who might not be aware. These include all edible aquatic organisms, including fish, shellfish, algae from marine and freshwater production systems. And the aquatic food system is all the different elements and activities that relate to aquatic foods within the broader economic, social, and natural context. And this is what we're highlighting. On the left side of the slide, you see the figure which highlights this interdisciplinary nature of aquatic food systems. And given this interdisciplinary nature, Working Group 3 was established with 14 expert members from diverse fields, ranging from food systems to ocean economics, going through different climate and environmental specialties. So far, the working group has worked to define the scope of Challenge 3, characterize the status of aquatic foods, and also identify key gaps and challenges. So regarding the scope, I first wanted to highlight the word feed, which is underlined here at the top of the slide in the title, because one of the first elements agreed by the working group was actually the need to expand the challenge from feed to nourish the global population, given that a critical challenge isn't as much about production and quantity, but more quality, health, and nutrition. On the right hand of the slide, this figure proposes what we thought was quite a good summary of the different opportunities and challenges of aquatic foods, and specific challenges that we're working to address include Anthropocene-generated pressures, ecosystem shifts, pressures across the value chain, which is very important. It's not just about production, data availability, and many different governance challenges. The working group also has so far identified key users of Challenge 3 and their specific needs. And I think what I would highlight here as most important is actually the breadth and diversity of users relating to aquatic foods. And as such, we found that user needs are many and varied, but the main one is actually to be able to provide a consistent and sufficient understanding of aquatic foods across all these different groups of users. So far, as I mentioned, Working Group 3 has also worked to identify key gaps, which the decade could address. And at the moment, we've identified two, let's say, types of gaps. The first one relates to current scientific gaps, and we've identified a few, and these will be explored in the white paper. But another and equally important type of gap that we notice is that there is actually quite extensive science already existing in terms of aquatic foods, but there's limited uptake in terms of governance, policy, and management. So this is also something we'll work to address. Nicolo, if you go to the next slide, please. And on this slide, we just wanted to highlight a few key elements of the strategic ambition as we are imagining it so far. so the future we want for aquatic foods. The first one is to have an integrated approach to the aquatic food system, because currently aquatic foods are often not highlighted as a critical part of food systems, which then leads them to being left behind and not integrated in important conversations, for example, in the blue economy, but also nutrition, health, and even different planetary environmental issues. The second element focuses on production and supply chains, which focuses mostly not on how to produce more, but rather how to produce smarter and better. So sort of the focus of this element will be on supporting sustainable and equitable innovation. The third element of the strategic ambition is focused on consumption. And this is, we've noticed that a gap in terms of science on aquatic foods is linked to consumption and social and behavioral sciences. So this is something that we've highlighted also that the decade could work towards. And finally, a key thematic element that we found is the need for greater inclusion of small-scale actors, because despite their importance, documentation and understanding are quite limited. And importantly, small-scale actors, as well as indigenous actors, are often not included in management policies. And so this is something critically that we want the Ocean Decade to focus on at all levels. And in addition to these thematic elements, I've also highlighted here in the slide a few cross-cutting targets and approaches, such as knowledge transfer, importantly linked to indigenous knowledge, transfer of sustainable practices. In addition, there's innovation and data is something that, of course, another working group is already focused on, but we steps. We will be, of course, focused on drafting the white paper and finding different opportunities for review and feedback, including, of course, this webinar, but also looking at different decade actions and working with other working groups to really work these cross-cutting issues, considering it's such an interdisciplinary topic. Thank you, Nicolo.
Thank you very much, Celine, for showing us the progress of Working Group 3. We'll move to Working Group 2, on challenge to protect and restore ecosystems and biodiversity. And the two co-chairs are Frank Miller-Carger, Professor of Oceanography at the University of South Florida, and Eileen Tan Chua Huai, Professor of Oceanography at the University Saint Malaysia. I know Frank is connected, so please, Frank, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you, Nicolo, for the opportunity to present on progress on Working Group 2. This challenge deals with ecosystems and biodiversity, and how do we do ecosystem-based management, understanding the effects of multiple stressors on ocean ecosystems and developing solutions to manage and restore these areas that are on which we depend. Next slide, please. The working group, similar to others, has a very diverse composition. People from around the world joined us. We have about, I think now, 21 members in the working group of all sorts of backgrounds and other areas of diversity. And we've been working on setting a strategic ambition, which really circles around the concept of ecosystem-based management, and especially improved information that can guide that management. We are also looking at a scope that goes beyond 2030. We look at the decade as a ramp on which we can take off and plan for beyond the decade itself. And especially we want to build and support what exists, use existing global frameworks and observing systems, and not replace them completely, but augment them or focus them. We want to integrate research policy and management in an operational framework. A lot of what we do today in ecology and in both basic and applied sciences in the ocean is based on research, and that really is not sustainable in terms of generating the information in a consistent way. So we want to point toward operational frameworks that support the information collection that we need. There are already many useful frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also many national requirements that either reflect that or you have to report to those global conventions. We're convinced that a co-design approach is required. You have to involve all the stakeholders in your plans and how you're going to focus the science and the solutions in that movement of research to operations. And we want to link better the things that exist already, the observing requirements that are being proposed by the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Group on Earth Observations, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission under GOOS, and all of its pieces. So, and we want to focus on best practices, and I listed some here, but especially we want to use standards in both how do you measure things, trying to find what the minimum set of requirements is to measure things, and then use the framework of the essential ocean variables, essential climate variables, essential biodiversity variables to get the community together around that. Next. So we have been talking about how do we define this, and I think that where we need the most help, and this is where I invite people to help contribute, is defining milestones and objectives between now and the end of the decade that we can say, yeah, we accomplished this. How do we measure this? So we think that we need to include industry a lot better in the way that we define sustainable development and conservation. And for that, we want to include people like those in the Ocean Stewardship Coalition that is organized under the UN. There's definitely a need to have people talk the same language, and in the way that we do observing, but we need to be comfortable in calling things monitoring and trying to get rid of that dichotomy between observing and monitoring, and committing to best practices. So we don't have a timeline yet for these milestones, and we would like to hear from other people on other milestones. And there's many opportunities for participation. One clear mechanism is proposing to the Ocean Decade through the actions process. There's an action request for proposal right now that is open. Participate in the Ocean Decade Conference. As Alison mentioned at the beginning, there's going to be different sessions that deal with these different challenges. And so ours is going to be on April 10th in Barcelona. Promote and practice the messages that we put into these white papers is going to be very important. And of course, and many of you already see that all of these challenges and working groups have to be completely interlinked. They're not going to work independently. So please contact us. I'm available, and so is my co-chair, Eileen Tan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for showing us the progress of Working Group 2. And last but not least, we'll move to Working Group 1 on Challenge 1, Understand and Beat Marine Pollution. The two co-chairs are Rosemary Rayfuse, Professor of International Law at the University of New South Wales, and Vanessa Hattier, Professor in Chemical Oceanography at the Federal University of Bahia. And I know there's Rebecca Zitoun actually representing the group today. And so please, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Zitoun. I'm the ECOP focal point in that group, and I will just present what we did in the last couple of months, and I will keep it really short and sweet. So our working group is basing their work around the definition of marine pollution by UNCLOS, and UNCLOS really defines marine pollution as any substance or energy introduced by humans directly or indirectly to the marine environment. And that can be from any source, which really results or is likely to result in harm of marine life, of hazard to human health, impairment of water quality, or marine activities. So what I just want to point out here that it's not important where the substance is coming from. The primary concern is actually what the negative impact of the substance is when it comes to marine ecosystem services and functions. And we also understand as a working group that marine pollution is not only a threat in its own right, but it's also a threat multiplier. So it reduces the resilience of marine ecosystems to weather the shocks of all the other impacts that the ocean is facing when we talk about overexploitation or climate change. And when it comes to pollutants, we are not only looking at the common ones everybody knows, right? So chemicals, biological active substances, waste, plastics, and products like oil and gas, but we're also including light and noise, which is really important. And while our understanding of the ocean is continuously improving, what we don't really have a good grip on is the emerging pollutants and where they come from and what their fate is. And that's really what we want to tackle as a working group, because you first have to understand what marine pollution is, what the fate is, what the long-lasting effects is. And then, as you all know, you can implement effective mitigation and management strategies. Oh, sorry, you can switch the slide. Yeah, that's pretty much all I said. You can switch the other slide. Sorry, I should have said that. Who are we? Like other working groups, our membership really includes a diverse group of individuals. We are about 20 people. So we are individual experts, but also institutional members and a lot of representatives from Decade programs, Decade actions, and Decade partners in general. What we have done so far is that through the distribution of questionnaires and surveys, as well as online meetings and internal discussions, we have identified a really long list of things that we want to address. Basically, we compiled a list of wishes that we want to achieve by 2030. And then we subsequently, as the expert group, identified a short list of priorities. So what we really want to focus on is data sets. So which ones are already out there? How can we make them more visible, more usable, more accessible? And then what data sets are missing and where can we add a bit more, right? Then we want to establish more baselines and criteria for what a risk actually is. So we really have to start putting evaluations and metrics and indicators in place. That might be different for each country, but we definitely have to do that. Then we have to add more regional networks for monitoring and observations. Again, the Southern Hemisphere is lacking behind to the Northern Hemisphere. That has several reasons that were already discussed by the other groups. And then we really have to develop predictive models. That's where the digital ocean comes in quite handy in the working group, because we really have to get a proper grip on risk assessments for new and emerging contaminants. And yeah, just finally, how you can contribute. It's needless to say that we're welcoming any input and feedback from a broad spectrum of people. You can actively participate by engaging in webinars or by contacting us directly or through the Ocean Decade Conference and its side events. There will be a lot of side events that are directly focusing on marine pollution. But it's really worth to note here that we are, one of our members is the Back to Blue initiative, and they're co-designing a roadmap to close the marine pollution gap directly. And their work really supports our work. So we're not duplicating efforts here. We are actually collaborating and working together. And I will have a hackathon coming up in November in the next couple of days. It will go for 6 weeks. And the outcome of this hackathon will flow directly into our working group. And just to say, finally, our draft of the white paper will be ready by next week. And yeah, I'm happy to answer some questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for showing us the progress of Working Group 1. As in this morning session, we are running very late, unfortunately, and we'll need to actually skip the Q&A session. But we've seen from the Q&A box many questions that were answered, and the co-chairs have been also answering many of those questions. But what we could do would be to follow up among all these questions that came from these webinars. Of course, you've seen the contacts both of the DCU, but also of some of the co-chairs of the working groups. You may also reach out to DCU through the contacts that were shared to have contacts of the different co-chairs. So I would say we'll skip the Q&A session, unfortunately. The recording will be available on online, but I would like to leave the floor to Aude Flamand, which will do the closing remarks and the wrap-up session. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Aude, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicolo. And I'd like to thank all the co-chairs and expert members that took the time to present their advancement today, and also to all the attendees for taking the time to join us. So for the key takeaways, we had a great summary from all the challenges and where they are on setting their strategic ambition, and we can see that they all have made great advancement. If you need additional, and as Alison mentioned, today was also their first opportunity to share their work in a public webinar all together. So I think that was very nice. And we also want to take an opportunity to call for action to have an active participation in the Vision 2030 process. And by that, you can participate in the direct consultation or review process. So please feel free to get more information on the Vision 2030 webpage that we shared the link in the discussion, as well as to get more information on the UN Ocean Decade Conference website. You can follow up at Vision 2030 at UNESCO.org if you have any question regarding the consultation or the review process. And also we will have another webinar in February, which will be kind of a follow-up of this webinar and share the final phase of the white paper before the milestone of the UN Ocean Decade Conference. Thank you everybody for joining, and we'll share the QA, the webinar after on the web page, and we'll take the time to answer all the questions that were asked in the Q&A. And I wish you all a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.